All right, welcome to Political Science 370, Social Science Research Methods. Today we will be going over articles that have been critiqued by Sarah Cohen and Michael Doerfler. And so we'll start with the article that was critiqued by Sarah Cohen and is called Conspiracy Theories and the Paranoid Styles of Mass Opinion. So, kind of an intriguing title. We're going to be taking a look at conspiracy theories. So, Michael.
Yeah.
Really quickly, about what percentage of the U.S. population do you think believes in some type of conspiracy theory or another?
25.
25%, about 1/4 of the population.
Yeah.
Interesting guess. They find that it's closer to about half.
Really?
Yeah, half of all Americans believe in at least some type of conspiracy theory out there, right? So they got some data that looked at this, and basically the data that they looked at was gathered in 2011, and it says the percentage of Americans agreeing with various conspiracy theories. And it's measured on a Likert scale. That's what it means when you go from strongly agree to agree, neither, disagree, strongly disagree. Right? So this is a 5-point Likert scale. Sometimes there's 7-point Likert scales, and somewhat agree or somewhat disagree is in there, But when they have that agree or disagree, and it goes evenly in both directions, it's called a Likert scale. Here at the end is just another measure, which is, have you heard of this conspiracy theory before? But these are kind of interesting. For example, they asked people where they've heard of this before. The U.S. invasion of Iraq was not part of a campaign to fight terrorism, but was driven by oil companies and Jews in the U.S. and Israel. Right? So 44% of the population had heard of that. 6% strongly agreed with that statement. 13% agreed. So you're like 19% agreed with that statement of the U.S. population. Then they go through a number of other conspiracy theories, and they find that when you look at all of them, a pretty decent percentage of the U.S. population agreed with at least one of these conspiracy theories that are out there. They actually had some that are, like I say, pretty out there. Like vapor trails left by aircraft are actually chemical agents deliberately sprayed in a clandestine program directed by government officials. Chemtrails. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah.
From that Alex Jones, doesn't he talk about
Something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, the point is they look at all these different questions about conspiracy theories, and they find that a surprisingly large percentage of the U.S. population believes in them, right? So this part of their study is descriptive, right? They just give you the data. This is a percentage of Americans who have heard of these theories and that either strongly agree, neither, disagree, or strongly disagree with them, right? So that part of the study is descriptive. And is pretty interesting in its own right. But then they want to look at what influences people's belief in conspiracies. So they kind of come up with this idea of conspiracism. This concept, right? That some people are inclined to believe in conspiracies. They're predisposed to to believe in conspiracies. So, the main table in this research, if you got to focus on one, is called Table 4. You can't see it. But what they basically do is they break the different conspiracies into 5 different types of conspiracies. Right? The first, they label supernatural. A belief in the supernatural. The next was Manichaean. The third was end times. The fourth was secret cabal. And then paranormal. And the way that they tried to measure these was by people's answers to different questions. For example, secret cabal, there was a question which asked respondents how much they agree with the statement, "Much of what happens in the world today is decided by a small and secretive group of individuals." Right? So that question was asked. Then a measure called Manichaean, which is drawn from some other people's works. And Manichaean goes back to Persian religious beliefs and a struggle between lightness and dark, good and evil. And so basically the question asks, politics is ultimately a struggle between good and evil.
Okay.
Yeah. Politics is basically ultimately a struggle between good and evil. You know, there's always a good side and a bad side duking it out. You can see maybe certain members of our own family view politics that way, right? So they say we also use other measures to gauge the willingness to make attributions to unseen phenomena, including questions of belief in supernatural phenomena. For example, the devil and angels, and paranormal phenomena. For example, ghosts and extrasensory perception. Finally, we further tried to gauge the attraction of Manichaean narratives with agreement to the statement, "We are currently living in end times as foretold by biblical prophecy." So, basically, they have those 5 different measures of conspiracism, as they call it, right? Okay, so, like I said, now each of those 5 measures is going to be its own separate dependent variable. And they're going to use OLS to explore the relationship between that dependent variable and a number of independent variables. So, basically, it looks like this. Belief in the supernatural is there on your y-axis. And education and other variables will be your independent variables there on your x-axis. Got that?
Yeah.
And they're just using good old-fashioned OLS, ordinary least squares, multivariate regression analysis, right? OLS, ordinary least squares. So, their table, which looks like this, which you can't see very well, but hey, you know what? Actually, you kind of see that pretty well. But I'll read it to you. It starts off with education. Education is the first independent variable, and there's a negative relationship between education and all 5 of the different dependent variables, right? So, just looking at belief in the supernatural, what does that mean? As education increases, what happens to belief in the supernatural? Decreases, right. There's a negative relationship between education and belief in the supernatural. They go through all 5 dependent variables, and education is statistically significant in all 5, right? So there's a strong negative correlation between education and belief in the supernatural, belief in the Manichaean narrative, belief in the end times, the secret cabal is really running things, and a belief in the paranormal, ghosts and ESP and all that type of thing, right? So why do you suppose there's a negative association between education and all those different measures of conspiracism?
Well, as you get more educated, you're more rational, I guess. You can maybe explain those things with more scientific ways, I guess.
Yeah, more scientific ways, and
either
also
that or you've been indoctrinated.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, so hopefully, you realize that there are other ways of explaining these things that are more scientific in nature. Also, go back to what we were talking about yesterday with the paintings and the consistency versus inconsistency. People like straightforward explanation to things. Well, I mean, straightforward isn't right. They like easy explanation to things.
Okay.
And so, rather than some complex scientific explanation, it's easier to just see everything in terms of good or evil. Well, somebody evil must be behind this, right?
Yeah.
So people have a tendency to believe in the unseen and the intentional, right? So, someone must be behind it, and they must be acting deliberately, right?
Okay.
The world can't just be driven by chaos. That's not, that doesn't make you feel good. So anyway, other interesting things in their study, being female, there's a positive association between being female and all these different measures of conspiracism, except end times. So, Michael's here, since he's the only one that can probably read this. He can be my witness. Take a look at that. Look at female. It's the second variable down.
Yeah.
Is it statistically significant in all the models except the end times one?
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of found bizarre. In their study, they say, outside of education, there are few consistent predictors of the predisposition measures. For example, then they say, for example, women are more likely to score higher on the secret cabal and paranormal measures. But they only mention those 2. They don't mention the other 2.
Why?
I don't know. And that's kind of a critique I would have of this study is why wouldn't they mention that? Because women in 4 out of the 5 are more likely than men to believe in these measures of conspiracism. Anyway, then African Americans are more likely to believe in the end times narrative. Conservatives are more likely to believe in a few Manichaean end times and secret cabal. It really is kind of a mixed bag all the way through. And the most consistent predictor is education, in all 5 models. But really looking at it, right-wing authoritarianism comes back statistically significant in 4 of the 5.
Yeah.
It's not surprising. So if you measure really high on right-wing authoritarianism, there's a positive association between measuring really high on that and believing in the supernatural, Manichaean, end times, but actually reduces your belief in the paranormal, ghosts and ESP, and that type of thing.
Okay.
Right-wingers don't believe in that. And then importance of religion, that is actually statistically significant in 4 of the 5. As religion is more important in people's lives, there's a correlation between that and these measures of conspiracism. Yeah. So, other than that, it's a mixed bag. Some things statistically significant here and there, but those are the main ones. Education, female, right-wing authoritarianism, and importance of religion.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, it's kind of dark. I don't know. But anyway, overall, it's a pretty good study. It contributes to our understanding of, it helps us understand what the predictors of conspiratism are. There aren't a lot of them, but they mention them. I think its main contribution is helping you realize that people believe in conspiracy theories a lot more than we realize. Yeah. It's a lot more prevalent in our society than we realize. So, they said, there it is. So, overall, good article, bad article. What do you think?
It's all right.
Yeah, overall, it's a pretty good article. Again, it's not going to change the discipline entirely, but it makes an all right contribution. It's a pretty good article.
Yeah,
it's a good article. All right, now we get to the article which actually you did, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
It was on nascent political ambition.
Yeah.
So, since you read the article closely, if I make any mistakes or leave anything out, feel free to correct me.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so, basically, the article is called "To Run or Not to Run for Office," explaining nascent political ambition, and it is written by Richard L. Fox and Jennifer Lawless, and it appeared in the American Journal of Political Science, as did this other article that we just looked at. They both appeared in AJPS. Okay, so basically, Fox and Lawless make the argument that there is a step in the political process that has gone unexplored so far, right? And that is called nascent political ambition. And it comes before the strategic decisions that usually go on when someone is deciding whether or not to run in a particular office, for a particular office, right? So they say a lot of research already exists that kind of looks at what influences whether someone will run for office or not. And that decision is based a lot on strategic considerations, like whether there's an open seat, the percentage of the electorate that's the same party as they are, whether there are term limits, right? So these are all strategic decisions when deciding whether or not to run in a particular race. And a lot of that research is grounded in rational choice theory. So people weigh the costs and the potential benefits of running for a particular office, and they decide whether or not to run accordingly. Accurate enough?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good, right? So they say before that step, there's actually an earlier step, which they call nascent political ambition. And they say it's during this earlier step where people consider the possibility of even running for office at some time, right? So some people have never even considered the possibility of running for office, while others have. So they say what affects a person's level of nascent political ambition, is different from what affects their decision whether or not to run in a particular race, right? So they decide to explain what they mean by nascent political ambition. This process that people go through where they consider running for office. And how do they measure nascent political ambition?
Just by the answer to a question whether someone had ever considered running for office or not.
Exactly. Office. So, basically, they're going to set that up as their dependent variable. Have you ever considered running for office? Did you ever consider running for office? And it will be coded 0 if the answer is no, and 1 equals yes, right? Okay, so then they will have a number of independent variables down here that they think will affect somebody's level of nascent political ambition, right? So, Michael, what are some of those variables?
Female.
Female.
Black.
Okay, race. Yep.
Yeah.
Black.
It's like family socialization. I'm trying to remember a bunch of them. Family socialization, political interest, issue passion. Current income, material ambition, career ambition. Oh, yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, these are great. Exactly, right? So, those are going to be their independent variables. So I wrote down just a few. Female, race, black, family socialization, issue passion, and females, dichotomous. It's a dummy variable. But things like family socialization and issue passion are going to be low to high, right? Okay, so because they have a dichotomous dependent variable, what type of statistical approach will they use?
Logit or probit.
Logit or probit, exactly. So remember, one of the assumptions of OLS is that you have a normally distributed dependent variable. When you have a dichotomous dependent variable, researchers will often use logit or probit. So that is what they did. And then table 3 is really the heart of their findings, correct?
Yeah.
All right, table 3, heart of the findings. Again, at the top, do you ever consider running for office? And so they title it Contemplating a Candidacy, Logistic Regression Coefficients and Standard Errors, Predicting Potential Candidates' Interest in Running for Office. So, as you go down, you're just going to have to take my word for it, because we don't have a chalkboard and it's hard to see. But again, I looked at strategic considerations such as self-perceived qualifications. So, the more qualified you think you are to run for office, what happens to your level of nascent political ambition? Increases, exactly. So, as self-perceived qualifications go up, it increases the probability that someone will consider themselves, increases the probability that someone will consider running for office, right? Political interest, not surprisingly, is statistically significant. So the higher level of someone's political interest, the more likely they are to respond, yes, I've considered running for office. Then they lump a number of variables under minority status. Women are less likely than men to consider running for office. Blacks are more likely, less likely than Caucasians to consider running for office. Hispanic, Latino, Latina came back not statistically significant, which is interesting. Family socialization. Didn't they measure that by how much your family talked about politics?
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah. So if your family talked about politics a lot and that type of thing, you're more likely to consider running for office. If you ran for office in school, you're more likely to consider running for office once you got out in the real world.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense. Then competitive traits, a number weren't statistically significant until current income. And there's a negative relationship between current income and considering running for office. So in other words, as your income increases, you're less likely to consider running for office. Why do you suppose that is?
Because it incurs greater costs for you to put your job on hold and run for office than for someone that has a lower income. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And again, perhaps this is a good time to point out, when we're talking about considering running for office, they mean any office, any political office at this point. People have a tendency to focus on president or Congress, right? Well, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives, there's 100 members of the Senate, there's one U.S. president, right? Yeah. Whereas there are like 500,000 other elective offices in the nation between all the city councils and school boards and county commissions and state legislatures. 500,000, So they said, for someone that's making a lot of money, serving on a school board's costing you money because you're not getting paid much in most school systems. Maybe if like the Birmingham school board, but anyway, most school systems are not making anything. So, yeah, there it is. Now, stage in life: married, no effect; having children, living at home, no effect; age had an effect. The older you get reduces the likelihood that you will have considered running for office. Then they go down, and the rest are not statistically significant. Then, how much time do we have? There you hear. They also took a look at, are you interested in higher level office, in high level office? And so it's interesting to compare, right? So they have ever considered running for office. That was their dependent variable in one model. And then their dependent variable in another was, are you interested in high level office? So interested in high level office, again, self-perceived qualifications, statistically significant. The more you think you're qualified, more likely you are to have been interested in higher level office. Being a female reduces the likelihood that you will have entered interested in high level office. Ran for office in school, again, is positive. Career ambition was not statistically significant in the first model. It is in this one. Probably because higher level office is more ambitious.
Yeah.
So if you're ambitious in your career, then running for higher level office is ambitious as well. So that came back statistically significant. Also, current income. In this model, there's a positive relationship between current income and interested in higher level office. Probably because higher level office pays better. And also, people who are already making a lot of money in ways can afford to run for a higher level office. So, now stage in life, if you're married, reduces interest in running for a higher level office. Having children living at home reduces interest in running for a higher level office. And the older you get, reduces interest in higher level office. Overall, they looked at those. And then they looked at all the structural, contextual variables that are supposed to impact whether someone... Which hand am I doing here? Remember I said there are different phases. There's the nascent political ambition. Then there's the decision whether to run in a particular office. And they said that one's really strategic. Whereas the nascent political ambition before it and is influenced by different factors. Anyway, they included all the usual suspects from the literature on a decision to run in a particular race, and none of them came back statistically significant. Yeah, so they're trying to illustrate their concept, nascent political ambition, is different from that decision to run in a particular race. Yeah, it's pretty good. Now, one of the things we do as we go through these articles is we talk about some concepts that have come up in the book or maybe in lecture a little bit, but we haven't had time to explore all the way, right? So, since I have Michael here and he's the expert, they conducted a survey of 3,800 individuals, right? Who did they send that survey to?
It was the 4 professions that produced the most political candidates, and they were business, education, law, and political/community activism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So Was this a simple random sample?
No.
No. Why did they send it to just those 4 occupations?
Just due to the difficulty of finding potential candidates.
Right. A lot of Americans have not considered running for office, right? So they sent them to the 4 professions that you get most of the candidates from, right? Okay, so does that make it difficult to generalize their findings to the overall population?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Also, another interesting thing about their sample is they use a stratified sample. Michael, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so not many women and racial minorities tended to be in the 4 professions they were sampling. So they had to stratify so that they'd get so that women made up 50% of their sample and African Americans made up about 10%.
Right. Yeah, because that's closer to what they are in the overall population.
Yeah.
So that's what they did, and that's called a stratified sample. And so, there it is. The next thing I wanted to explain was in OLS, we've talked about R squared a lot, right? And so we'll go back to Sarah's article where they use OLS, and they have an adjusted R squared. Don't worry about the fact that it's adjusted. Just treat it the same as R squared. But in Sarah's article, they use OLS, and there's the adjusted R squared at the bottom there for the different models. And you see the first one is 0.47. So that means their independent variables explain about 47% of the variation in the dependent variable, right? So pretty good. But then the next one is 0.148. The next one is 0.36, which is a little more respectable. The other one is 0.17, and the other one is 0.10. Yeah, so again, R squared doesn't get talked about a lot, but basically they're a lot better at predicting people's beliefs in the supernatural than they are people's beliefs in the paranormal.
That seems weird, doesn't it?
Well,
They're the same thing.
they're I guess they're not.
Yeah.
You know? Because they're explaining 47% of the variation in people's beliefs in the supernatural, but only 10% of people's beliefs in the paranormal.
Weird.
Yeah, that is a little weird. And like I said, R squared is always interesting to look at. I think it's overlooked and neglected too much. So, remember, your R squared measures overall how well your model is predicting the dependent variable, the variation in the dependent variable. So it's a measure of the overall goodness of fit, measure of the overall ability of the model to predict the dependent variable. Okay, and it's used with OLS. Now that takes us to what happens when you're using logit and probit, right? When you're using logit or probit, R squared cannot be calculated the same way. It just can't. Because remember we talked about how it measures the distance from each observation to where the regression line predicts they should be. You know, you can't really do that with logit or probit because either someone's considered running for office or they haven't.
Yeah.
Right? and so it's not like, oh, we got close. It's just different. So, methodologists that are very good have developed techniques to try to capture the spirit of R squared even though you have a dichotomous dependent variable, right? And so they found a way to kind of attempt to give you a similar measure, and it's called pseudo R squared, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at the paper Michael did, it's right there, pseudo R squared. It's kind of hard to read. But it's 0.44 and 0.30, right? So, what are they better at predicting? Whether you will ever consider running for office or whether you're interested in higher level office. What are they better at predicting?
Would you ever consider running for office?
Exactly. So, why do you suppose they're better at predicting that than whether you're interested in higher level office?
Well, one thing I did notice is they took out issue passion and political interest, and they claimed those wouldn't have an effect, but then you look and the pseudo R squared's lower, and you're like, well, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Right, maybe we should have included them. Fewer variables.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I think it's just because interest in higher level office, I think, is just harder to predict.
Yeah.
You know, fewer people do it. It's more random, and so it's harder to predict than, hey, you're politically active, you care about things, you know your neighbors, your family talks politics, why don't you run for the school board? I've thought about it. And so they're actually better at predicting just that overall, have you ever considered running for any political office, than they are you interested in higher level office. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one of the nice things about having the pseudo R squared in a paper like this, is it allows you to at least compare one of the models to the other, and you can ask, what are they better at predicting? And it just gives you a very, very rough feel of how well they're predicting the dependent variable. Another statistic a lot of the time that you'll get when they're using Logit or Probit is percent correctly predicted. So if you put in all the data, I know you're Caucasian, you're male, you came from a family that talked politics all the time, you had all these things, then my model predicts you'll consider running for office. If you could compare that to the actual data, they got it right 76% of the time, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
why wouldn't the R squared be the same as, or the pseudo R squared be the same as that? Why is it?
It's just different. Like I said, it's beyond this course.
Okay.
And methodologists have established a way of trying to calculate it that's similar but not the same as R squared.
I like the other one, the percent correctly predicted. It's straightforward.
Yeah. How many times, based on your data, and everything else, how many times do you correctly predict the outcome? They got it right 76% of the time. That's pretty good. All right. Well, it has been a pleasure as always. Students, quick note on just procedural stuff. Make sure, if you haven't already, that you get an electronic copy of your paper to me before it is due, so that I have a chance to read it and we can have these beneficial discussions. And sometimes I may select just different articles just because I think we need to cover additional material or something like that. So if you do an article and you turned in and we don't cover it, don't feel offended. It just may be that I think we need to talk about something else that day. So, take care and see you guys later.